Good evening, Des Moines. Welcome to the Doc and Lefty program here on webcast1live.com. We are sitting in the always, the hotbed of political discussion, the studios here on the Skywalk in downtown Des Moines. Sitting across from me, as always, the man who's got Rocky IV on a perpetual loop at his house right now, Dr. Pat Bertroche. Doc, how's it going?
Yes, Rocky IV.
The Cold War's back.
It is. See, that's where you're mistaken. The Cold War has never left.
He couldn't be happier.
It's got a little bit warmer.
He could.
And then, I'm not happy about this. All I'm doing is saying, I told you so. I told you so.
My good friend has been living on Lake Placid dreams and Rocky IV nightmares ever since 1980. Anyway, folks, a lot of stuff is
wrong.
No,
I'm
just
hurtful.
Everybody knows I'm kidding.
Frank, you need to hold me.
So anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on internationally. The situation in Ukraine and the Crimea and Russia and the Western European response and our response, that's all moving very, very quickly. And we will get to all of that probably next week because, as promised, we have a very special guest with us tonight to talk about the juvenile home in Toledo, the kind of a follow-up, not really what we had thought about trying to do with our follow-up from our interview a couple of weeks ago on DHS, but this is certainly a juvenile expert. This is a guy who knows the lay of the land, who has got his, the governor has his number. This is the guy that the governor tapped to chair his committee to study this thing. Jerry Foxhoven. Jerry, I can't remember all of your different titles at this point. It's been a while. I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, Jerry Foxhoven, who is the director over at the Middleton Clinic for Juvenile Law at the Drake Legal Clinic here in town, was my faculty advisor when I was going through law school those 3 years. And so I've known Jerry for a long time. But Jerry, just to kind of fill in the gaps of my lackluster introduction, tell our viewers about yourself, your history, a little bit biography.
Sure. I practiced law here in Des Moines for about 25 years. I was a litigator, always did a lot of juvenile work. Headed the Child Advocacy Board at the state for 6 years, and then came to the Drake University Law School. I headed the Children's Rights Center there, and now I'm director of all clinical programs at Drake.
So you're the main boss now.
Well, of clinical programs. I'm not the dean.
Right of the clinical programs. Did you have to wrestle Bob Rigg for that gig?
I do. Now he gave it up by default. He wasn't interested in taking that role, I think.
Whenever I see Bob, he's kind of walling around with some of the younger guys like myself and a lot of those court-appointed defendants that you get in Polk County, and he just seems like he couldn't be happier with what he's doing.
Yeah, he loves what he does.
Oh, yeah.
All the clinical professors like what they do. We get to work with, law students who are still fired up about doing what they're doing and representing real people in court. It's a great thing to be
before we can become jaded and cool off in a hurry. Jerry, what was the reason, do you think, that you're actually, you know what? That's a terrible question. I'm going to back up for a second because we got into some of the history of why the board that you were or the study that you were tasked to chair popped up, and we discussed a little bit of that, but kind of go into a little bit more detail about what exactly happened in case some folks didn't tune in the last time.
Sure. An independent group called Disability Rights Iowa, we call it DRI, did an investigation. They represent people who have all kinds of disabilities, and there are a lot of kids with disabilities in the Toledo home. They did an investigation of sorts at the Iowa Juvenile Home in Toledo and released a report and said that kids were being held in seclusion for long periods of time, overuse of seclusion, problems with their educational system and so forth. And they filed a report with the state, gave it to the governor, and presented it to the governor. It was pretty high profiled in the press and so forth. And then the governor reacted by that in a couple of different ways. He issued an executive order that created this task force to take a look and make recommendations about the juvenile home. He also ordered that trauma-informed care, kind of the state-of-the-art training for workers who work with kids, be instituted immediately, which was a little behind the times. The private providers had been doing that for many years. He also ordered that the use of seclusion be reduced immediately, that they comply with the same kind of restraint and seclusion requirements that are made of private providers as well. And then he appointed this task force and said, tell us where we go from here. And that's how the task force got started.
What?
Oh, hey, wanted if you wanted to jump in there.
Well, I was just a couple of things. One, amazing that the state was behind the private sector in caring for children and those with disabilities. That's a shock to this guy. And then two, Toledo did a job that not a lot of other places wanted to do. Now, did you encounter anything like that? Any resistance along those lines? Or?
There's a couple of things that I need to say about that, because we hear that all the time. These were very, very difficult kids, and of course they were. I mean, this was used as the placement of last resort for kids. And as a result of that, and that's bad for a couple of reasons. One is that when you have a placement of last resort like that, it means that kids have been through a lot of different placements before they get there. And every change in placement damages a kid. And so they became more and more dysfunctional before they even got there. Secondly, that kid, when they're being told you're the worst of the worst and this is your last placement, you know how teens react to that. Not good. And so their behavior went bad. And then the staff there reacts differently when they're told you're getting the worst of the worst. And that's part of what led to this problem.
So you think that the patients there at Toledo were told they were the worst of the worst, and that's why they were there?
No, what I'm saying is that having a place of last resort where both the people who work in the facility and the kids are recognize that these kids are supposedly the worst of the worst doesn't lead to good treatment and good outcomes for those kids and good attitudes to be able to treat them. It's just not a good way to go. And so that led to a lot of the problems. There are a lot of things that led to it.
You bet.
But it had been going on for like 17 years. This is not...
There's nothing new, yeah.
Frankly, the easy thing about being in this task force is we were trying to keep it very non-political and felt like it could be, and it's kind of gotten a little bit there. Mm-hmm. But we felt it could be because this had gone on through administrations from both parties. And so it wasn't a situation where people could say, okay, this is Governor Branstad's fault, or this is Governor Culver's fault, or Governor Vilsack's fault. It happened through all of their administrations that these problems occurred. And so it gave the task force the opportunity to say, okay, this is not a political issue. And, to his credit, when I got the call to be asked and was asked to be on the task force, the governor asked me to be on this task force, and I said to him at the time, what are you looking at here? Because, most of us assume somebody who's elected to office, they get some kind of agenda. And the governor literally said to me, I have no agenda here. Everything's on the table. All I want you to do is tell us what's best for these girls, for these kids, and do it in an open and transparent manner. And so with that, how could you say no? And by the end of the conversation with him, he said, one more thing. And I thought, well, here it comes. And he said, this is not about money. This is about what's best for kids. Just tell us what's the right thing for kids. And so, I felt like we were able to move into this situation as a task force with really no control from anybody telling us where they wanted us to go. Just said, literally the only mission we had was tell us what's the right thing to do for these kids.
All right, great. We have Jerry Foxhoven with us. He's from the Drake Legal Clinic. He was now I thought you were the chairman of this.
I was chair.
Chair
yes.
of the Toledo Investigation Group. Was that the official name?
It was called the Iowa Juvenile Home Protection Task Force.
Oh, good and governmenty. So you're listening to Doc and Lefty on webcast1live.com. We're here every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. We'll be back right after the break. Please stay tuned and listen to our sponsors.
Petrosh & Associates, how can I help you?
Petrosh & Associates will provide you with a friendly, caring, and confidential place to find help for mental health concerns. We are ready for your call. Our doctor, Dr. J. Patrick Petrosh, provides a full range of psychiatric services for children, adolescents, and adults in a forthright and informative manner while maintaining a casual, comfortable, and relaxed atmosphere.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. There is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life, change your relationships, transform your world.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. You know, this is the kind of raw, unfiltered style that Doc and Lefty brings to you every single Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 on webcast1live.com. We don't want to be too managed. We don't want to be too produced. We want to keep bringing you our thoughts about the news and world events as unscripted and completely natural as possible. So even when you see Doc giving me tips about how to be a better conservative, and he does from time to time, all the time, then that's what's going to happen behind the scenes. Anyway, So we're sitting here with our special guest for the entire hour, Jerry Foxhoven, professor at the Drake and director of the Drake Legal Clinics for the Drake Law School here in Des Moines, and also the chair of the governor's task force, the Iowa Juvenile Home Protection Task Force. Now, Jerry, it's weird. It's weird calling you by your first name. I apologize. I'll stop stumbling over it. But so you studied the issue. How long did you study the issue?
Well, we were appointed. The governor made his appointment in August and said he needed a report by the middle of October. So, it was a very short period of time, very intense. We spent a lot of time, but it was like a full-time job for those months.
Sure. And you issued the report. I have to confess that I read the bullet points. I didn't get into the meat of it. I know that Doc is a psychiatrist here in town and a noted child specialist, a juvenile specialist here in the metro. Read through it when it came out at first. I know that so he'll have some thoughts about that as well. But could you tell us sort of what the general recommendations, kind of the highlights, and then what the response to those recommendations has been?
Sure. We had a number of recommendations. One is that it was clear to us that you should not combine boys and girls in the same institution there. The kind of the treatment modalities are completely different for the two. They had very few boys. I think at the time we looked at it, there were like 4 boys there and 20-some girls. So that was an easy call to say, let's get them out of there. Everybody was in agreement that you should not mix them. It also involved a whole lot more staff to keep them segregated the whole time because everything was separate for them. And so that didn't make a lot of sense. And so we said, we need to get the boys out of there, first of all. Secondly, we said that we had a mixture of what we call China girls, which is child in need of assistance, kids who are either abused or neglected or have significant mental health needs. They're in court not because they broke the law. They're in placement in court because they have some unmet needs, either that their parents can't or won't, or they've been abused, or they have severe mental health issues. And they combined that with the Girls State Training School, kids who've broken the law. And we also said, this doesn't make any sense to combine them. Legally, you can't create a secure facility for China girls. They're victims. They're people struggling with mental health issues. They're not criminals. And you can't use the same kind of restraint and so forth. And so we said, get the China girls out of there. The next thing we said is once the China girls are out of there, then you need to take a look at, do we have enough truly dangerous girls that we need a facility at all? And somebody needs to look at whether that's feasible or not. In the last 3 years, the highest number of girls we had that were delinquent girls that were for training school was 15 in any month. We averaged about 10 or 11. And we certainly questioned whether even those 10 or 11 needed to be in a training school facility. Girls are substantially different from boys that break the law in terms of what kind of crimes they commit. And then lastly, we said DHS shouldn't be in the business of operating a school. They were operating a school there, and that's not what DHS does. We recommended that the school be operated if you had a training school, that it be operated by either the AEA or the local school district, that it be funded, and it might still be on that campus, but that it not be operated by DHS.
Now, you did not, in fact, and this is something we've heard a lot, and maybe it's a misunderstanding. You did not, in fact, your group did not, in fact, recommend closing the facility there in Toledo.
We didn't formally recommend closing. I think many of us anticipated that could happen because we said once you get the boys out of there, once you get the China girls out of there, it leaves delinquent girls. And, we had a 26-acre campus with averaging 10 or 11 girls there, 13 cottages. It didn't make a lot of sense. We also knew that the cottages themselves were unsafe, and that's one of the things we said in the report. It's not safe. They're very, very old. They are not set up for the kind of girls they were serving. A lot of these girls were self-harming. Doc would relate to this. There was a lot of kids that were suicidal and so forth. We had them in cottages that were on 2 floors with a stairwell. I mean, there's no easier way to kill yourself than in a stairwell, and the rooms were old and had exposed conduit. Again, person could hang themselves from the conduit. It was an unsafe. The cottages were not safe.
Do you think that that a facility with the same kind of mission that the Toledo school or the Toledo facility had is necessary in the state?
Well, if we're talking about we have private providers that already do the China kids for the most, and we have other state institutions for that. So the question is, do we need a girls' training school?
Right.
And I think there's been a lot of debate about that. I think there are some people who feel very strongly we need a girls' training school. I'm not so sure I agree with that. And I think we're at the point where we need to first say, before we commit to building a girls' training school, we should say, how many girls do we really have that are dangerous? Because I think if we build it, we'll fill it. And I'm not sure that's a good idea. So I think we need to look at delinquent girls and say, we only had, a dozen of them when this place closed. A number of them went home. Courts ordered them home because they didn't even feel they needed to be kept in there any longer. And so I think that we need to look at what kind of offense do they commit? Are they really dangerous and so forth? We were spending a lot of money on these kids in the juvenile home. And while the governor said this is not about money, and it wasn't about money, the bottom line is we could provide a lot of services for these girls for what we were spending locking them up in the Toledo home. We were spending over $500 a day per bed. And for that kind of money, we could provide a lot of wraparound services for girls. And so I'm one who believes that when something like this happens, when we have the opportunity, when a small group of kids where the facility closes, that's the perfect time for us to start questioning, do we even need beds for them? Could we provide for the same money services that wouldn't require us to lock them up, that we could provide psychiatric services, psychological services, job training? We could provide what they really needed and increase their chances of success without having a lockdown.
Sure.
Now, I have a question. Do you have you had any follow-up with these girls after they've been released?
DRI has.
Okay.
We have not, but DRI has followed up all of the girls in all of their placements since they were moved. And so there's a couple things I would say about that. The first is that a lot of people are critical about whether it's Chuck Palmer, the governor, who moved them to where, and I hear people saying they got scattered to the wind and so forth. And Blake, you're a lawyer. A judge ordered it. If kids went home, there was a hearing, and the judge had to say, "I ordered this kid home. I think that's the right placement."
That's right.
And so every place these kids went, a judge ordered it and felt it was the right place for them. And DRI followed up all of their placements and really found that all of them are getting better services than they were getting in Toledo. Of all the facilities, one of them, and I don't know which it is because they've not identified the names, they weren't happy with. A lot better than Toledo, but they were not happy with all of the services they were getting.
Yeah. Well, so you made this. You came through. You made these recommendations. You handed it off to the governor.
Yes.
And then he probably sat down with a bunch of experts, and then he decided to close it. Now, why do you think we don't need another girls' home here, another state-run facility?
Well, a couple of things. I think the governor looked at us as the experts, frankly. So I think who he met with after the report were primarily people from that community, people from that were constituents and so forth, and asked them, tell me what you're thinking. Again, I can't tell you, should there never be a girls' training in school in Iowa? I don't know. I don't think we know enough to know whether there should be or not. I think we need to be in the process of actually looking at these girls and saying, are they dangerous or not? If these kids, if the bulk of them, and I know they all had mental health issues, taking a kid who has mental health issues, and you don't treat them the same way as ones who just have criminal thinking. If you have a kid, for instance, that he's robbing a bank because this is an easy way to make money, threatening to put him in solitary confinement makes him not rob banks. Threatening to lock him up makes him rob banks. Kids who commit crimes, assaults and things because they have mental illness or because they have a mental disorder, putting them in solitary confinement doesn't make them better, it makes them worse. And so the whole methodology that you use to change behavior is different. And all of these kids had mental health issues. The question is, were there some that were just primarily criminal thinking? I'm not sure that was true, and I think we need to figure that out. Do we have those kids that are dangerous because of criminal thinking?
All right. So one of the issues I deal with all the time is, how they define mental illness is completely different in my field than it is in you guys' field.
Yeah.
And a lot of times mental illness boils down to what the judge decides is mental illness. And from my perspective, it seems like there's a lot of overlay between behavior and mental illness. You have a lot of kids with ADHD, which is considered a mental illness, and most of these kids don't commit crimes, but some do. And some kids, unfortunately, have schizophrenia that commit crimes, but most kids don't. So I guess the thing is for me, how would you be able to separate, the criminal from the mental illness? And how would you be able to develop a facility like that could separate those two?
Well, I think that's where we need to go across the board. Number one, all of these girls had psychiatric diagnosis. So we're not talking about the court just labeling them mentally ill. We're talking about a psychiatrist or someone giving them a diagnosis. And so if you have a kid who's schizophrenic, taking them and putting them in a correctional setting isn't very healthy. We're learning that in the adult field. We're doing that to adults all the time. Our prisons and our jails are full of people with mental illness, and they don't get better locked up. They get worse. Their mental status degrades as a result of that. So, and I think we'd all agree with that. So that is a process we need to start sorting out. Is this a mental illness that's causing the behavior, or is it what I call criminal thinking? Are they just antisocial or whatever? That's a lot of these kids that were there were suicidal as well. Again, taking a kid who's suicidal and putting them in a correctional institution where you try to control their conduct by putting them in seclusion in what looks like a solitary confinement cell in a prison doesn't help someone who's suicidal get better. It gets much worse.
I guess I have well,
we'll get back. We'll get to that right after the break. You're listening to Doc and Lefty. We have Jerry Verhoeven, chairman of, you need to tell me the name.
Yeah, with Juvenile Home Protection Task Force.
There you go.
There we go.
We got somebody important. He's so important, I can't even remember what the name of his task force is. That's amazing. So we'll be back right at the break. Listen to Doc and Lefty on webcast1live.com.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Get away from us, you need old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're saved! Consumer Credit! You're our hero!
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Doc and Lefty, webcast1live.com. We have Jerry Foxhoven with us for the hour. Jerry, if you haven't been paying attention to the first half of the show, was the chairman of the governor's task force looking at the Iowa juvenile home for I was about to say wayward girls, but that's like a 19th century thing that you could call something like this. That's not what it was. That popped into my head for some reason. But we were talking about some of the solutions and some of the response to recommendations that your task force made. And one of the concerns that I have about mental health services in Iowa is I do a lot of mental health commitments in the rural counties. And so, and without boring everybody about the process and the rules behind committing someone with a mental illness, is that one of the real consequences to a mental health commitment can be an indeterminate confinement to a hospital. You're not in prison, but you are in that hospital by order of a court until you get better, which could be for the rest of your life, presumably, if you take it to its logical conclusion. And one of the concerns that I have, obviously, there are lots of due process concerns with that, with keeping someone in there forever. But if we are looking to reform the system, are we moving towards more of a model like that where you get released when a doctor says so? What if a doctor doesn't say so? Do these kids kind of just, they go into the commitment system never to be seen again? These are really sort of breathless kind of comments, and I don't mean to sound like that, but those are the concerns that I have about about the court kind of easing back a little bit from some of this stuff.
Sure. I totally understand the concern, but that's certainly not where we would be, because if it's a delinquency type case, there are limits, constitutional limits.
Right.
The sentence can't be longer than it would be, for an adult for the same offense, and they have to get out when they're 18.
Right, and I mean more about on the mental health side,
right?
Especially if we have this mental health, because obviously the mental health commitment process is vastly different than China or delinquency or anything like that. But what I mean is that if we are focusing more on the mental health side of it, which is important and sounds good, are we opening ourselves up to these longer confinements, even if it is under doctor's care, and whether that's right?
I don't think so. And part of it is because these girls, for instance, in Toledo, from time to time would go into a mental facility for short periods of time, 30 days, 2 weeks, whatever, and then come back to Toledo. And one of the things that we recommended on the task force is that the legislature had ordered DHS to look at ways to not send so many kids out of state that were what we call the high-end kids with really high needs. And so one of the things that they did is that we have basically an HMO that is run for our Title 19, which is done by Magellan. And Magellan offered it for an RFP to pretty well the request for proposals to all the private providers. And Four Oaks stepped up and gave a proposal for this. And so Four Oaks in some of their facilities agreed to take 10 kids at that time. This was maybe 2 years ago or a year ago. And they said, we'll take 10 of the high-end kids, and we will agree that we will not reject any of them. You send them here, we'll take them, no matter what their needs are. And we will not eject any of them. We won't give a 10-day notice like private providers are able to do. We will take them no matter what, and this is where they'll be. Now, they got a lot more money for that. They were paid a lot more because in some cases, they had one-on-one care 24 hours a day with those kids. Still cheaper than Toledo was. And so they were able to make it work. It's been very difficult for Four Oaks. I mean, their workers' comp claims went up, their property damage went up. But what they did find is those first few months when those kids came there, the kids acted up. And once they saw that no matter what happens, I'm staying here. I might go in for a mental commitment and come back, but I'm coming back here. You're not going to give up on me. Their behavior substantially improved, and they got to understand these kids and do that. So one of the things that the task force recommended is that the state look at doing those kind of contracts with more providers so that we could take high-end kids and not have a placement of last resort, but have their first placement be their last placement as well, so they don't change from one to another.
One of the things that I know is you just touched on it. We send a lot of kids out of state. And, we send them to Texas. There's a facility in Texas, in Illinois. We're paying $780 a day for these facilities. Now, you just got done telling me we were spending $500 there. My question would be, why don't we take that money, create something that is, because part of the problem that you've outlined is with the state, there's really no oversight. They didn't have any oversight. If they had to go through the crap that I have to go through for my facility, Youth Homes Mid-America, I mean, they never would have passed. I mean, the inspector would have walked in and shut it down, and it been like that.
Is it really a two-tier? The state facility, are they really that, for lack of a better word, unregulated as opposed to the private?
Toledo certainly was, and it was for a number of reasons. That was another issue that the task force addressed, and we said that if you keep that home open, it should be subject to the same kind of regulation and oversight that the private providers are.
Absolutely.
One of the problems is that if you are, for instance, Eldora is the training school for boys.
Right.
Only training school boys are there, delinquent boys, no China boys. As a result, the national organization, the ACA, who accredits correctional agencies can accredit that. But they will not accredit a facility that mixes those kids. And so you couldn't get accredited by the groups that would regulate places like Youth Homes of Mid-America, and you couldn't get regulated by people that regulate, that accredit places like Eldora. And so as a result of that, there was no accreditation and no oversight. And again, we agree with you, Doc. We recommended that they be subject to the same kind of oversight. Now, I think that's why the governor has really taken the position of, we should instead of investing that money in a state institution, we should go to the private sector and purchase services for those kids, place those kids where there is regulation and oversight both by the state and by independent agencies and minimum requirements.
Right. Well, I guess my thing is we could use that money. At one point, I had it all calculated out. It was around $60-70 million a year is what we spent shipping these kids out of state. In addition to that $500 a day, we could very easily create a state-of-the-art facility here in Iowa so that these children don't have to leave the state. You could hire 3 full-time psychiatrists, and with the revenues you could generate with the plan that you have in perpetuity, but then make that state facility subject to all the accreditation and everything else like that the privates do.
And I think the question is whether it should be a state facility or a private facility, and it doesn't really matter to me. I think there is a discussion up at the Gold Dome, right, and has been this whole time, about should that be a government function or should that be a private sector function? Should we just contract with like we did with Four Oaks and pay them and have them take that responsibility to do it?
Yeah. Now this is one of the few times where I'm going to sound like a liberal, but my opinion is the state facilities do serve a purpose. Just like Jerry pointed out, I mean, Four Oaks, they've had all kinds of problems. I mean, here's the problem with having, lawyers talking about medical stuff is, here's the thing, without revealing anything, it's a small psychiatric community. I mean, it's not like there's 6,000 psychiatrists here. I mean, for crying out loud, there's 8 of them in Des Moines. I know them all. I know most of the psychiatrists across the state. So from my perspective, I see the other end of this where, when you have state contracting, that's really a disaster, which I guess brings me to my next question. What was the composition of this task force? I mean, we had you, and it seems like, honestly, I think you guys did a pretty good job with this, coming in, taking a look, identifying what the problems are. I think it was well written, and I think it was a great job. I just want to know what the composition was.
Sure, it was a small group. We did have a clinical psychologist, Dr. Pelton, who was on it. We also had an AEA, Area Education Association, woman with a PhD, who specially is disability, kids with this disability. We had Ron Steele, who you probably know at one time.
I know Ron.
One time headed Youth Homes of Mid-America.
Yeah, you bet. He's the guy that hired me.
Yeah, there you go. So he was wonderful. And Chuck Palmer, who's the director of the Department of Human Services, who for the most part was more a resource to the group than he didn't guide the group at all. He kind of sat back basically and said, "What do you need from us?" And so I think we had people. It was a small group that really, I think, knew kind of what we were doing and really focused on what's the right thing. Now, Doc, as to what you said about should it be state or if it's a training school, if we had a training school like Eldora, I think that's a state function. And I've never been too crazy about prisons and jails run by the private sector because they get the incentive to keep the beds full, so they don't want to send them home.
There's some problems with that.
Yeah.
Yes,
and so I don't like that. But if you're talking about kids getting mental health treatment, I really don't care if it's a state institution or a private institution. Now, I do think that the problems that we have in our institutions today, our state institutions today, is that they were built at a time when we institutionalized a lot of people. Yes. And so we have huge campuses that are out of date that need to be modernized. Now, I'm not saying we should shut them down, but I mean, the state needs to invest some resources in modernizing all the institutions we have, making them a better fit for the services that we do. And that's one of the reasons it's so expensive, because we've got, as I tried to tell somebody once, it would be like if a university had a dorm that holds 800 kids, and you only put 100 of them in there, the cost per student goes way up because a lot of fixed costs are involved in that. And so I think we do need it. We should be thinking long-term about all of our institutions. How do we spend some dollars to modernize them, make them more efficient? They were built at a time when we institutionalized lots and lots of people, and that's not where we are today. We institutionalize fewer people, and I think that's a good thing. But as a result of that, we haven't invested in the infrastructure that we should in those institutions.
Great. We have Jerry Foxhoven with us. He was chairman of the Toledo investigation group, because I can't ever remember what the whole thing was called.
The Iowa Juvenile Home Protection Task Force.
Only lawyers would get that stuff. Anyway, we're going to be back right after the break. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Please watch our commercials. Our sponsors, what allows us to keep the lights on in our beautiful, lovely studio.
Yes.
Along with Frank, who's about the hottest producer I've seen since Maddie.
Keeps him in figs and sunglasses, my man.
Yes, that's right. We'll be back right after the break.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. There is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program, or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life. Change your relationships. Transform your world.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're here with Jerry Foxhoven for, the next,
20 minutes.
40, 50, 60, 70 days, because I'm having a great time discussing these issues. And now,
Yeah, and I'm catching, generally in my field of expertise, I'm usually right on the ball. Yeah, but there's some things I've learned here. So this has been very educational for me. I'm sure it's been educational for you.
I love it.
Frank looks stunned back there. I think we're just overwhelming him with information.
See, our producer, great as he is, and I won't say that he underestimates us. I think that he properly estimates us, but the bar is so low that whenever we do something interesting or have a spectacular guest, or we can pull somebody with as much gravitas.
Yeah, because he has to pull the bar out of the mud.
That's true.
There you go.
That's true.
That's how low it's set.
Now, Jerry, while we have you here, I'm curious about a couple of political things, political questions revolving around this story. Not necessarily the give and the push and the pull of the Democrats, Republicans in the state house, and certainly I don't want to get into whether it was constitutional for the governor to close the home. I think judges have ruled on that, or they're going to. Did he appeal?
He appealed.
Okay,
it's in front of the Supreme Court, so it'll be a while.
Right, it's going to be a while. And that'll be an interesting case to read once it comes out. But I'm curious about the long-term effect on the Department of Human Services itself. We had. Everybody has always decided that they are the poster child for they get the most grief out of almost every other department in the state, from all sides, it feels like to me. But I've noticed, and I mentioned this to you before we started the show, a little bit of a ripple of parents who I think are probably trying to use what happened at the juvenile home to scapegoat the department. Or scapegoat themselves maybe and use the department as kind of a straw man. Do you think this has greater political ramifications for the department? And do you think that your reporter, your task force role in this whole situation could cause some shakeups, some reforms department-wide?
Well, I think there'll be some, I don't know department-wide. I think it will make them start taking a look at all the institutions and saying, are we doing the right thing for our kids? I think one of the things that as the task force, we didn't say in our report, but that we were a little bit stunned at is when we first were looking at, there were like 119 people working there. And and you had under DRI's findings, Disability Rights Iowa, at least one girl who was kept in solitary confinement for 11 months. We had thousands of hours of seclusion. As I told one person, at least that some of the kids, particularly that girl that was in there for 11 months, if we did that to a murderer at Fort Madison, he'd sue us in federal court and he'd win.
Yep.
And these were kids with mental health needs. They were kids. And I think one of the things that concerned all of us, and I think that Director Palmer is looking at saying, what can we do about this, is that a culture was created over those 17 years that nobody there said, what's going on here? We're hurting kids. We need to work up the ladder and change this. Nobody did that. We had 119 people, and not one person stepped up and said, what are we? It took an outside group to say, what are you doing? In fact, it was, as you probably saw in the press, somebody had retired from there, and they did a PowerPoint presentation, and one of the PowerPoint slides had a picture of that solitary cell with a skeleton in it, and it said, "Oh, I was supposed to check on him every so many hours, and I guess I forgot." Yeah. So it almost felt like they were almost making light of the fact that kids were in there for a long period of time, and that's significant. I think that's almost scary, and I think if there's any rippling effect, it will be. You know, I know Chuck Palmer made a real commitment to. We need to make sure that the people that work at DHS get rid of that kind of culture and would step up and say, what we're doing isn't right. Let's do something about it. I know he's very committed to try to change that.
Do you know, and you might not know this, has anybody lost their jobs over this?
You know, I don't know. I know that one person from that facility was charged criminally with assaulting a child that was on film.
Do you what do you think about kind of going up the chain? I'm not going to ask you maybe to speculate about Director Palmer himself, but I mean, should the department bear any more responsibility? Maybe does the director need to be replaced? Or
well, you know, I don't think so. And again, an easy answer would be, well, if that were true, you know, the last 6 or 7 directors of the Department of Human Services, we could say should have been fired for it from both administrations. Right. The Department of Human Services has 5,000 employees. They do a lot. Somewhere, if it had come to Director Palmer's attention, if somebody had come to him and said, this is what's going on, if DRI would have come to him, told him about that, and he'd have hushed it up and never done anything, I'd say there's a problem there. That's not what happened.
Doesn't he
here.
have a responsibility to take a look at facilities that are under his jurisdiction?
Of course he does, and he has people that, and he has somebody that's head of facilities. But what I'm saying is that I think that the department needs to take a look at how do we look at those things better? How do we make sure we have the pulse of what's going on? And I think it's important to really stress the culture. People become, and I think you know this, Doc, this field is not the best paying field in the world. People don't become social workers because it's a slack job. It's a very difficult job, but they have a calling. And when people at a facility like that don't step up and say, kids aren't protected, we need to do something to get them back to thinking about why they became social workers to begin with, to change that culture.
Let me ask, that reminds me of another question that I just had. Were the people at the Iowa juvenile home, were they the same sort of DHS employees that you see in a China case where you have your department worker? Were they similarly trained, similarly titled? And if so, could that be an area of reform where folks working in institutions aren't your social worker 2 or 3 or whatever it is?
They're not the same.
They're not the same, okay.
And one of the things that I think we did find, and Doc, you being from youth homes, you'll know, we were not holding the state to the same standards for the qualifications we'd require for staff there. So we literally had youth counselors, some with GEDs, that we wouldn't let you do that, in the private sector.
That's just stunning
some of those things were problematic, and I'm sure that's why the governor says let's go to the private sector where we have clear regulations. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's one of the reasons that our task force said we want to make sure that everything across the board is equal. If you keep a facility, they should have the same kind of licensure requirements, meet the same kind of accreditation, and have the same kind of standards for the employees.
Have you been satisfied with the legislative response so far?
Well, no.
That was a great question.
I could have told you that.
While the task force didn't recommend what to do about closure, we kind of assumed it would based on our recommendations. And frankly, I personally was pleased with what the governor did. I think he did the right thing when he closed it. The legislature, it's become very political in the legislature.
Why do you think that
unfortunately.
is?
Well, I think, there are elections coming up. And so I think that drives a lot of, from both parties, it drives a lot of people in the legislature to say, wanting to stake out ground and saying, this person's doing the wrong thing or that person's doing the wrong thing. And, I've tried to say to everybody, this issue of Toledo is dead.
Right.
Does Toledo open or not? It doesn't open. Okay. So we should be looking at what do we do with the resources we spent on Toledo for those same kids that we were serving. The reason I say it's dead is this. The district court in its ruling, which has been appealed, said the governor was wrong in closing the facility because he could have closed it by line item vetoing the funding, but he didn't do that. Well, you know when the funding runs out that he didn't line item veto? July 1st.
Right.
And so when a budget comes before him this next year, the district court told him, if you want to close it, here's how you do it. You line item veto the money for it, and it's closed. So legally, the court has made it very clear. You can close it by line item vetoing it, okay?
Right.
And so Toledo's done. That facility isn't going to be there. It's pretty clear. The governor has said, I don't want it there. If you passed a bill putting it there, he's going to veto it. If you just fund the current statute, he can line item veto it. And what I would hope that the legislature would start doing is being realistic and saying, if that's where we're going, why would we want to make him line item that money out of there? Why don't we take that money and earmark it for those kids? The same kind of money, and we could solve a lot of problems. Argue about whether we're going to have a training school later.
Right.
But right now, we want to make sure that these kids get the services they need. Now, one last thing is there is some money in his budget to restore their education that they lost because education was a problem at Toledo. The Department of Education made a finding that they were actually telling kids they had to earn the right to go to school and that the education system failed them and ordered that the state provide remedial education to them. And the governor had to put $1 million in his budget for that.
I got to say, the Democrats on this, Iowa Democrats don't give themselves up to criticism very lightly. And in this case, I'm going to criticize it. From a political standpoint, you don't go against a popular governor, even if it is Terry Branstad, has been around forever. You don't go against a popular governor who, for all intents and purposes, is going to be reelected. No offense, Jack Hatch, who said,
We're trying to get Jack on the show. That's why he doesn't show up.
Who said, I'm closing this home that is abusing kids. I don't know what especially in the get along, go along legislature, what the Democrats are doing, I think, is political suicide.
I'm gonna just throw my hat into why a lot of Democrats aren't that smart. They had this facility that they were going to close anyway, and they wrote a letter to the governor. You need to keep the facility open. And the facility even said, no, this is part of our scheduled close, and this is how we're going to take care of the patients displaced by this. They even wrote a letter to the Democrats, who wrote a letter to the governor, and they still insisted to keep that thing open. And you're like, dude, my question for you is not silly.
No.
Oh, all right.
No, the Democrats are silly.
Because you never know. He throws things in right before the break.
No, I wouldn't do that to you.
See, we have to take a break. He's good at that. He times it.
I'd never do that to you.
Ask your question.
Ask your question.
We're going to ask it right after break because we have to take a break. You're listening to Doc and Lefty on webcast1live.com. We're here every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. We have Jerry Foxhoven. Man, I know. We're just going to be back after the break. We're glad Jerry's here.
Bertroche and Associates will provide you with a friendly, caring, and confidential place to find help for mental health concerns. We are ready for your call. We are proud to work with military personnel and their families. Our doctor, Dr. J. Patrick Bertroche, provides a full range of psychiatric services for children, adolescents, and adults in a forthright and informative manner while maintaining a casual, comfortable, and relaxed atmosphere. Our licensed mental health therapists provide individual counseling to children, adolescents, and adults, including couples and marital counseling. Visit our website at bertrocheandassociates.com for more information or call 515-334-9484. Our offices are located at 5525 Meredith Drive in Des Moines, just east of Skate North off Merle Hay Road. Isn't it time to talk to someone? Take care of yourself and your family. Contact Bertroche and Associates.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're here with Jerry Foxhoven for the last couple of minutes, and
a solid 8.
A solid 8. We can push it maybe to 8.5, but any longer than that, they turn the lights off, and then things get
because I
really
want to spend
blue.
a second or two yakking about Ukraine at the end.
So, okay. Well, then ask your question. We'll get into that.
Now, Jerry, having worked with the judges in the juvenile court system, they have some turnover just like any other job. Do you think that before they take the bench, these judges need to be trained about really what goes on in the mental health community versus the criminal community?
Yeah, you know, we have some training, but honestly, it is kind of surprising that when judges become sworn in, they get appointed as judges, that they typically go right on the bench and they
get
start
sworn in, you know.
They start working right away, and
Yep.
then I think about a year later they send them to this judges school in Reno and a national judges school. So
Really? There's a national judges school?
I think that that doesn't make sense. Now, it would make more sense to spend some time mentoring with other judges, watching hearings, and because some of the judges may have done a particularly limited area of practice. I think that's a fiscal issue, and I think that the courts have really had their back up against the wall on funding for a long time, haven't been being able to fill judicial vacancies. When somebody retires, they have been delaying filling the vacancies because funding has been behind. And so I think that's an area that we need to have more funding, and hopefully at some point the legislature will give more funding to the judicial branch so that when somebody gets appointed, they don't have to put them on the bench the next day. They can have them work with other judges and kind of learn the system.
And to follow up on that, I think that one of the biggest weaknesses of how we do it, other than just a judge not maybe having mental health experience, you wouldn't expect a judge to necessarily have that. And if you do, it's a lucky day, and we applaud that person. But when they're new and getting their feet under them, I think that some judges and even can tend to lean on the department a little bit and this is coming from a parent's attorney that I've got a bias against some of this stuff, but lean on the department a little bit and take the recommendations a little as a little more independent than perhaps they are. I see a lot of the time where the department worker and the county attorney are working hand in glove, and that's not wrong. That's not terrible. That's how the system kind of works. But especially in a China case, if it's not meant to be adversarial, and taking your kids is the most adversarial thing that can happen to a family, then I'd like to see judges be a little bit more impartial with respect to some of those DHS recommendations. But that's a parent's lawyer speaking. I'm certainly have my own agenda when I say that, so take it with a grain of salt. But that's just my 2 cents.
Blake, let me say this. Part of that is because so many parents' attorneys aren't fighting for their clients.
Right.
And you know, you do. But if a parent's attorney doesn't fight for the client, the judicial system is uniquely qualified to decide contested cases.
That's right.
It's uniquely unqualified to decide cases where everybody just walks in and says, here's what we do, because they can't go out and investigate, call witnesses, and so forth. And so I've been, as you know, I've been advocating for years that attorneys either need to get their name off the list and not take court appointments to represent parents in court, or they need to go fight for their parents. If you fight for parents, you can change that. And if all of them were fighting for their parents, that would change that. And that's what we need.
Well, the one thing I'd really like to throw into this mix is, because we have 2 attorneys talking about what they should do, which is, I mean, that's our process. I'm all for that. But I can't tell you how many times I've been overruled with somebody that's not even an LISW. You know, here I am, a psychiatrist. There's nobody that's more responsible for that child's life than me. You can't sue the judge. You can't sue the attorney. Generally, you don't anyway. But you can sue me. And so legally and ethically, I'm the one that's most responsible. So if I say, geez, this is really what ought to happen with this child, and then I have some, LMH, or not even an LMHC, just an LMH.
LMSW or
whatever it is,
SW,
telling me, well, hey, listen, I don't agree. And then suddenly the judge goes, yeah, I agree with that. I think that's just ridiculous. I think
Doc,
that would take care of that.
The other thing that drives that somewhat is that money. money drives some of these kind of decisions. We're trying to do a revamping of Iowa's mental health system.
How does
we
money
need to do that.
drive that? I don't get that.
It drives it a lot because of where the resources are to be able to provide the services that people need, and so that's unfortunate. And we're in a major redesign of the state's mental health system, and hopefully that will help solve some of that problem.
Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't think of it that way.
So you wanted a couple minutes about Ukraine here at the end before we wrap up.
I did. Now, I have been talking to a lot of people, and they really don't understand what's going on in Ukraine. There's a whole lot of hysteria out in Washington, and rightfully so, because, the Russians are on the move again. Two things. The Russians already had a ton of troops in Crimea because they have a military base there. I mean, that is their only warm water or cold water port. When it gets to be winter, they can still use their ships out of that port. That's what they need. That. I mean, they need it. It's like if the only port we had was San Diego, we'd be pretty upset if anything happened in Mexico right there.
That's pretty. Yeah, they're landlocked. Other than that, yep.
Two, Putin needs Europe just as much as Europe needs Putin. Putin knows what he can do. America has a history of really allowing other countries to push us around until they invade another country, right? When they violate the borders, that's generally when we get all geared up. There are exceptions to that rule. Putin knows this. He's not going to move any further into Ukraine because that will mean essentially that he's going to cut off his only real source of income, which is Europe. Europe isn't going to make the Russians angry because basically Germany needs that energy to run its economy. So if you really want to know what we're going to do in Ukraine as a response, don't watch NATO, don't watch Obama, don't watch anybody but Angela Merkel. She's going to set the tone and the pace, what's going to happen in Crimea and how we're going to respond. Lastly, I'm going to say, Putin says there's no Russian troops there. The guy's lied before. There probably are Russian troops. We know there's Russian troops. He may be saying that there's no new Russian troops. The bottom line is the Russian troops that are there in Crimea are more than capable of taking Ukraine. It's always been that way. They've been stationed there ever since the breakup. The last point, you have to keep in mind that Crimea is not really part of Ukraine. It's like an Indian reservation. I know they're sitting right there in the middle of us, but they don't really have to follow any laws, and the only people they answer to are the feds. And for the most part, the feds leave them alone. That's how Crimea is. And the bottom line is they had a government that asked the Russian troops to come in. So as far as international law goes, all that was legal. What Putin did is legal. Now, if he moves into the actual entity of Ukraine, then that's a different subject. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to pray for Ukraine because there's a lot of people over there that are very scared. There are no more food on the shelves because the entire system has shut down over there. People are fleeing right and left. So I just ask everybody to pray for Ukraine, make sure everything's going well. Now, hopefully that was not as negative as it could have been.
No, but we're going to end it on a positive note.
Well,
we had a great guest. We had a great guest. We had a great show. Jerry, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Jerry Foxhoven, the director of the clinical studies over at the Drake Law School Legal Clinic, the chairman of the Iowa Juvenile Home Protection Task Force that was appointed by Governor Branstad last August to study the potential closure at the time, but now we're fighting about legislation. Anyway, we'll be back next week with more hot takes on cool subjects. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you all next Tuesday. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Representative Tom Shaw, and I love these guys. Both of them.
Love these guys. Get over here. Love both of them.